Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Macdonald-Laurier Institute webinar. I'm Casey Babb, Director of the Promised Land here at MLI. We're speaking today, of course, about the Middle East at a moment when the region feels incredibly volatile and where the road ahead remains very fraught and unclear. This is the case, of course, in Gaza, where terrorism and suffering and political paralysis and even opportunity seem to collide. And in Iran, where the stakes really have never been higher and where civilian suffering is, of course, catastrophic right now. Today, the purpose of our webinar is to discuss all of this with an emphasis on President Donald Trump's peace plan, what might be in store for Gaza, for Palestinians, for Israelis, and what may or may not happen in Iran. We'll also be talking about something that is often overlooked, and that is, of course, what role Canada could possibly have in the future of the Middle East. Ultimately, though, the purpose of our conversation today is really to ask hard questions. What paths toward peace remain viable? What regional dynamics are shifting? And what the future may realistically hold for the region if current trends continue or if different choices are made. And to get into all of this, we have two very special guests joining us that I'm honored to have participating. Dr. Michael Doran is Senior Fellow and Director of the Center for Peace and Security in the Middle East at Hudson Institute. In the administration of President George W. Bush, he served in the White House as a Senior Director in the National Security Council, where he was responsible for helping to devise and coordinate United States strategies on a variety of Middle Eastern issues, including Arab-Israeli relations and U.S. efforts to contain Iran and Syria. He also served in the Bush administration as a senior advisor in the State Department and a Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense in the Pentagon. We are also joined by Dr. Ronen Hoffman. Dr. Hoffman is the former ambassador of Israel to Canada, member of the Knesset and the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee, co-founder and founding general director of the International Institute for Counterterrorism, director of the Herzliya Conference, personal aide to Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, advisor to the Minister of Defense, and coordinator of the Israeli delegation to peace negotiations with Syria. He is now president of EIS, Electric Infrastructure Security Council. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
I'd like to begin with you, Michael, if I may, just to give people a general 30,000-foot snapshot of President Trump's peace plan for Gaza. For some people listening today and tuning in, they might have a loose understanding of what that means or what the purpose of it is. But could you give us sort of your thoughts on what it is in terms of just a high-level overview?
Sure. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me, and thanks to everybody who's tuned in. President Trump's peace plan has two parts to it. We're at the end of stage one. Stage one was a ceasefire, return of hostages, and in exchange for release of Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jail, opening up the crossings to deliver aid into Gaza. And stage one went relatively smoothly. The reason for that is that it was, I think, all of the actions that each party was supposed to carry out were very well defined, and it was sequenced very clearly. Stage two involves the disarmament of Hamas, the introduction of an international stabilization force, and a new governing body in Gaza. And stage two is proceeding very slowly, or let's say much more slowly than stage one. And the reasons for this are pretty clear. One is, to put it at its the broadest terms possible, what is expected of everyone in stage two is more abstract than what we had in stage one. So you have the issue of Hamas has to disarm. What is disarmament? Does disarmament mean that Hamas puts down its weapons, but keeps them in their own magazines? Or do they deliver it to a third party, or do they completely disband and leave Gaza Strip? So there's a negotiation that has to go on about what this term disarmament means. On a more practical level, there's the more difficult question, which is who's going to disarm Hamas? What's the force that's going to go in and point a gun at Hamas fighters and say, put down your weapons or else? And the fact of the matter is, Casey, that nobody on earth really wants to do that job, including the IDF. I mean, if it has to, it's ordered to, the IDF will do it. But it doesn't want to, because if the IDF were to go into Gaza to disarm Hamas, it basically would level Gaza, and that's not because the tactic of the IDF is to level Gaza. It's because that's what any military would have to do when confronted with a terrorist army that hides behind its own population, that is hiding in tunnels and sniping at you from the top of rooftops. You have to go block by block and take it out, and that means leveling Gaza. The Israelis don't want to do that. The IDF also says to itself, if we go in and we do that, at some point we have to pull back out. What happens then? Who's going to govern? Who's going to govern Gaza? The Americans don't want to see that happen either. So President Trump came up with this idea of an international stabilization force. This brings us to the Egyptians, the UAE, the Jordanians, the Azerbaijanis were floated at one point. But they would like to be peacekeeping forces, but they don't want to be the force that will actually disarm Hamas. And this leads to another issue, and this will be my last point here. The minute you start talking to Arab militaries about carrying out a role in Gaza, they ask two questions. Arab countries ask two questions. What is the political authority under which we're going to operate? And what is the political goal of our operations? And number two, what's the international legal authority under which we are operating? These are not abstract problems for Arab countries, because they're going to be accused the minute they put their forces in Gaza of being the action arm of Benjamin Netanyahu's war against the Palestinians. They would like to have a two-state solution with the Palestinian Authority as the governing body of Gaza as the ultimate political goal. But that's unacceptable to Israelis of all stripes. They would like to have a UN resolution that endorsed their activities and enshrined the two-state solution. And they don't really have that either. They got a UN resolution that made a kind of a nod toward a two-state solution, but it didn't give them what they wanted. So President Trump is trying to square the circle here with his Board of Peace. A lot of the press on the Board of Peace, I think, has said accurately that this is a body that is meant to be a kind of alternative to the United Nations. It's an international body that's more responsive to American goals, and frankly, more under the direct control or at least direct influence of the United States and of Donald Trump. But it nonetheless gives a kind of international legitimacy to what President Trump is trying to achieve in Gaza. So at the moment, just to sum up here, then we're a little bit stuck. Maybe stuck is the wrong word, because there is forward motion and there's pressure from the president, and that's interesting. The situation is dynamic, but we still don't know. No one can say what is the force that's going to go into Gaza and actually make sure that Hamas disarms. Nothing that we want for Gaza can happen until Hamas disarms.
Right. That was great, Michael. Thank you for that. Ronen, I want to move to you because, as many of us know and saw this week, the last hostage was returned to Israel, which, I've described, and I think you would probably echo this, Ronen and Michael, as obviously a victory, a really scenes coming out of Gaza of the soldiers, a very emotional moment. Is a beautiful moment, but tragic. There's some closure here. It's just a very, very heavy thing for people to see this week. But it does, I think, mark. It's a sign that things are changing now, and there's probably some closure in terms of the ability now for, everybody from soldiers to politicians to just Israeli society more broadly are able to now sort of turn their attention to other things in different ways. Ronen, how are people feeling about this peace plan and what might be ahead in Gaza right now?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me and for the opportunity. Casey, to answer your question and to continue in a way Michael's analysis, let me first of all suggest that when we speak about, or when we look on the Gaza issue, it can be viewed through, I would say, three conceptual frameworks. One is the ideological framework, right? The Islamic revolution, or the clash of, I would say, the internal regional clash of civilizations between extreme and moderate Islamic forces. So Hamas is a Palestinian offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood. There is a clear and direct ideological and political common ground between the Muslim Brotherhood and present-day Turkey, for example. So in other words, Gaza can be seen as part of a broader civilization clash, including an internal struggle within Islam between currents that advocate civic legitimacy and those that advocate religious legitimacy. So this is just one framework. The other one would be Hamas, within the context of the regional alliances and axis. Hamas as an Iranian proxy, and therefore Gaza has Hamastan, an Iranian Qatari, or maybe even Iranian Turkey forward base on Israel's border. And the third framework for analysis could be to view Gaza as a front, as a battlefield, a dense and compressed territorial arena that stands on its own. So I suggest that when we address President Trump's initiative, we take into account elements from all of these frameworks as references, reference point, I would say, for analysis. And now to your question, look, I see the current phase that we're starting, phase 2, as we call it, I would say the day before the day after. And let me explain. Israel did not have any plan for the day after when the war started, and during the war as well, the way I see it. So from the very first moment, Israel's war objectives have been primarily military nature. So, and Michael's asked what would be the political objective, the political goal of the whole thing, and this is a very, very important and critical question. We know that military power is meant to serve political objectives, yet it is not at all clear what Israel's political objectives were or are. So therefore, the expression of this is, Israel doesn't have, and I would say has never had during the war, its own plan for the day after. Moreover, I would say, without President Trump, Israel was unable to achieve even its most basic military goals, meaning the return of the hostages back home and the dismantling of Hamas as a governing entity. Therefore, I view the first stage of Trump's plan, the one that has been achieved, as I would say, the line that ends the war, and the current stage, which is phase 2 that's starting, as the day before the day after. And we need to wait and see what will be the third stage, which is completely unclear for the long term. In summary, I would say that I think that the logic of phase 2 is clear and well designed. I agree with Michael, but its success depends on 4 major pillars, I would say. Israeli security requirements, the containment of Hamas, credible international engagement, who is going to take part, as Michael described, and local Palestinian legitimacy, which is very, very important. Israel should have power of veto on all this, which is, a complicated aspect by itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you both raise, obviously, the point that President Trump is the central figure here, or at least one of, obviously. But for a lot of us, it's unclear in terms of, his role going forward, whatever that looks like, whatever the path forward ends up being. It's going to be significant, his influence and his direction, and his vision. But for a lot of us, it's unclear in terms of what he actually wants. And I don't know, personally speaking, if he's articulated that in a way that is particularly clear. With Iran, for instance, he's issuing some pretty big statements on social media and elsewhere, and his thinking is somewhat clear when it comes to what he wants to see happen there, maybe what his red line is or is not. But Michael, what's your sense in terms of what the president actually wants to achieve in the Middle East, and not just Gaza, and not even just Iran, but maybe more broadly, if you could speak to that? I mean, is this a legacy thing for him? Does he just want, as we so often hear, a deal? How should we think about what he wants in the region?
Clear, actually. And it's laid out in the national security strategy that the White House put out, which I personally think is a very interesting document. It didn't get as much attention as it deserves, and the White House didn't write it in such a way that I think it would have an influence on the wider discussion. But what he's saying is the United States is shifting its attention to East Asia, and that's the primary arena of pardon me, I have a frog in my throat. That's the primary arena of U.S. military engagement, which means that the United States has to pull back somewhat militarily from the Middle East. But we are not leaving the Middle East. We retain vital interests there. And so what we have to do is we have to make a new order in which the United States does not do all of the heavy lifting militarily. And both in the national security strategy and in his actions since he came into office, he clearly sees the U.S.-Israel relationship as a central pillar of the new order. And he has created a new military relationship. He's taken the U.S.-Israeli military relationship to a new level. The U.S. and Israel went to war together in June. Israel took out all of the air defenses of Iran, and then the United States came in with the B-2 bombers and bombed the nuclear sites. This is wholly unprecedented in U.S.-Israeli relations. But the U.S.-Israel relationship is a central pillar, but it's not the only pillar. And he also clearly sees the U.S.-Turkish relationship as a pillar. And there's a reason for this, because when you look at it, to the extent that America's problems or challenges in the Middle East are military challenges, there are only two allies of the United States that have the ability to project military power beyond their borders, and that is, they are Israel and Turkey. So those two countries are looming very large in his mind, as are the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar, and those are the legs of the stool on which Donald Trump wants American power to rest. The Gulf states, Turkey, and Israel. Now, they don't all get along, and there's increasing tension between Israel and Turkey. So he understands that he has to play a mediating role between the two. Now, while he's doing this, there's this other problem of Iran. In a sense, what's going on among the Muslim countries in the Middle East is a contest over who leads the Middle East after the Iran. So we're in the contest for the post-Iranian order. Not that the Iranians established the order, but the Iranians had positions, forward positions all around the region, and the war with Israel has collapsed those. So Iran is still there. It's still a danger. It's still lethal in many ways, and it's still hostile to the American order. But it is not as influential as it was. And the Saudis, the Turks, the Emiratis, the Qataris, they're all swirling around each other to see who gets to be who will be the top dog in this post-Iranian order, and exactly what that post-Iranian order will look like. And I think that's where a lot of the uncertainty comes in, is the tensions between Israel and Turkey, especially or let's say Israel and the Emiratis, opposite the Turks and the Saudis, and then the differences among the Turks, the Saudis, and the Qataris. This creates a very kind of complex kaleidoscope, really. With each day, with each major event, you see different permutations, developing among these countries. I think when Trump looks at that picture, he thinks, well, we have to solve this Iran problem. And what I think he would like, what he wants, I don't know that he can get what he wants, but what he would like to have is an end to the Iranian nuclear threat without completely destabilizing Iran and having chaos there for the rest of his term. You know, he says over and over again that if he had been president, there never would have been this war in Gaza and there never would have been the war in Ukraine. He said it so many times, I think we have to believe him. And I think that the fact that he believes that, there's a kind of a corollary to that belief, which is that I don't want to spend all of my second term dealing with these conflicts that wouldn't have started if I had been in power to begin with. These are not my wars. I want to put them to an end. But unfortunately, it's not that easy to do. I think last June, after dropping bombs on Iran's nuclear program, he expected, I believe, that the Iranians were going to come and negotiate with him, and he was going to be able to put that Iranian nuclear problem to rest. But they didn't. They were not chastened in any obvious way by what happened. And so now he's asking himself two things: what do I need to do to chasten them, so that we can get down to the business of just stabilizing the region and moving on with my other priorities? That's A. And B, he's also asking himself if it's enough just to take care of the nuclear program, because I think he can see more and more, as the Israelis see, that the ballistic missile program is as great a threat as the nuclear program. So where he wants to go, I think, is pretty clear. He wants to end the Iranian threat and find an accommodation among America's partners in the region. And Gaza is central to that idea of finding an accommodation among all of them. But it's not very easy to do, because the region is there. God created the Middle East to foil all of the grand plans of American presidents.
Right. I mean, Michael, you've sort of just led me here now, and I feel like I now's the time to ask it, and I'm sure people listening want me to ask it, or they plan on asking it. So, question to both you and Ronen. And Ronen, maybe we'll start with you, and then I want to shift gears and talk about some sort of multilateral engagement in the region. But you know, I have friends and acquaintances and family members in Israel right now, and there are lots of rumors circulating in Israel. Always lots of rumors in Israel, but if they're saying that, that means they're definitely hearing things. There's some buzz. Should people expect some sort of military action from the United States in Iran? Ronen, what do you think? Is this something that's on the horizon?
Well, obviously, I don't know, and it's good that I don't know, and I think that it's good that nobody knows. It's obviously a reasonable scenario and a reasonable option. I think that even more, I would say, not important, but more direct question would be, when I think about what people in Israel have in mind, if there is a military operation, or if there is something else, I don't know, some kind of a political or anything, any move, significant move, what it will lead to. That is, to go back and back time and again to rounds of confrontations. Again, it's an option. Israel has been part of it and had some great achievements in the war. But the thing is, what should be done in order to stop that vicious cycle? And taking into consideration that Iran is let's say, the head of the snake here, and we need to deal with it. But whether it would be a military operation, if it would be a military operation, would it achieve the goal for the long term, or just create more rounds coming? So I think that nobody knows, and I think that in many ways, although it's hard not to know, it's good that at this point the options are on the table.
Right, Michael. What's your take on this? What's the sense in your world in terms of whether or not the U.S. is going to carry out something in Iran?
I find myself wanting to claim that I do know, just so that I seem like I'm in the loop and important, but I actually don't know either. And I agree with what Ronen said, that the question is, I think this is the question Donald Trump is asking himself: is there a military option that I can exercise that will significantly change the calculations in Tehran, that will change the balance of power in a significant and permanent way between me and the Iranians? Because the problem that he has with the Iranians, I think, is twofold, actually threefold. Number one, it is the Iranians are not inclined to compromise with him, and in a sense they can't. If Khamenei agrees to his only, let's say, only on the nuclear file, and not on not on the ballistic missiles and the support for proxies. Because what the Americans are demanding is that Iran capitulate on all three. But let's just say that we look at the nuclear file alone. If Khamenei, after years and years and years of saying, I will never compromise with the Americans on their terms, goes and does this, it's an admission before his own people of weakness. It's an admission of that really the days of his regime are numbered. So I think that we can expect him to continue to stiff arm the president. Now, maybe things are so dire there, and he's aware of how dire they are, that he will actually hold out the possibility of a real serious compromise along the lines of what President Trump would want. If he could offer that, basically no enrichment option with serious inspections by the IAEA, Donald Trump might take that deal. I wouldn't rule that out. But I think the chance that he'll take it is slim. Although he might move in that direction in the hope of roping the United States into a long process of negotiation that will allow him to buy time, build up his ballistic missiles and his air defenses, and so on. But the problem, so the other two problems that Donald Trump has are, number one, there are no cracks in the regime. Despite the entire population nearly of Iran, an incredibly broad-based protest movement in every major city, involving all ethnic groups to one extent or another. Despite that, we haven't seen members of the security forces siding with the protesters. we haven't really seen them actually refusing to carry out orders. We haven't seen the protesters capture any major public space and holding on to it for any length of time. So the regime looks at this point to be rather unified, and that means that we can't assume that just because the Americans and the Israelis hit it hard again, it's going to crack up. That there's no guarantee of that, at least from what we can read in terms of the public record. The third problem that President Trump has is that Iran's ability to carry out a counterattack, a very lethal counterattack against American forces and against Israel, remains significant. The ballistic missiles that they have are very serious weapons, and even if they don't do damage, they are very costly to the Americans and to the Israelis. If only because they burn through lots of interceptors, of which there's a global shortage. If we just look at one system, the THAAD system, these are the exo-atmospheric interceptors that the Americans have. The Israeli equivalent is the Arrow 3 missile. The United States used up 25% of its arsenal, its entire arsenal, last June against the Iranians. And under current rates of production, that will take 5 years to replenish that. We did not build our force to meet the kind of threat that we actually have, that has become apparent since the Ukraine war. China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea are very aware of this, and they're carrying out a kind of war of attrition designed to force us to make hard decisions about what we will defend and what we won't, and what we won't defend. And this strategy is successful. It's forcing hard decisions on the United States. So where does this all lead? This leads to basically what Ronen said, that Donald Trump doesn't want to go to war against Iran unless there's a relatively certain guarantee, or at least a high level of certainty, that the result of that war is going to really change the game. If we're just going to absorb more ballistic missile attacks from the Iranians, and we're going to have another round, and the situation is going to be in stalemate like it is now, then why even bother going through this round? So that's what's going through Donald Trump's mind right now.
So obviously, I'm listening to both of you, and again, the centrality of the U.S. in all of this is not lost on me. It's almost making me, when I'm listening to both of you, we haven't yet talked about other countries that could be involved in all of this. I mean, short of some of the key Middle Eastern players, the Gulf countries, and so on. But I'm wondering if there must be a sense in DC of feeling like they're sort of doing much of this in isolation. I get the sense that the responsibility almost for whether it's Gaza or Iran or elsewhere in the region really falls to the U.S. right now at a pivotal time. And Michael, you talked about this earlier, that this is laid out quite clearly that America is looking to pivot beyond the Middle East. So I now want to start asking some questions and getting your thoughts on, okay, well, what are people saying and thinking in terms of other nations who could be involved in this process, in this sort of, as you mentioned earlier, Michael, this sort of alternative to the UN? And I want to focus on Canada. Ronen, you were the former Israeli ambassador to Canada. Let's start with you. I mean, when you zoom out and you look at all of these things happening in the region right now, frankly, I think a lot of people are looking at, if they're Canadian and they're looking domestically and saying, well, should we have a role over there? What could that look like? Why don't we have more of a role? These are things that people are starting to talk about in Ottawa and elsewhere. What's your sense of what, how Canada is viewed, maybe in the US and Israel, and what role Canada and Ottawa could have in the future?
Yes, look, I think that Canada's foreign policy has long been I would say, rooted in multilateralism, coalition building, institution strengthening, and development-oriented diplomacy, I would say. So let's go back to Gaza for just to illustrate it. We're talking about the phase 2 in Gaza. So if it's successful, and if there will be some kind of hope for an ongoing process, constructive process, I think that Canada, has the credibility, the international diplomatic trust, I would say, and the multilateral instinct to help lead what could become even a mini Marshall Plan for Gaza. Yeah, I'm talking about the long term, and I don't want to sound naive here, but I'm saying that there is a role for Canada to play. Something like a comprehensive reconstruction efforts or process and development initiative that focuses not only on rebuilding infrastructure, but also on rebuilding opportunities such, let's say, creating industrial zones and new factories in the future, investing in large-scale infrastructure, developing governance training programs, which is very important, by the way, to the question of who is going to take over in the day after, right? Developing or mobilizing global investment, deploying Canadian expertise, for example, in institution building within the Palestinian political system, within the Palestinian society. So, by doing those things, I think that Canada could prove that its multilateral foreign policy tradition is not just a style, but it's an asset. It maybe not, it's not immediate, but looking forward, talking about the near, maybe even the long term, I really think that it could position Canada as a leader of an important part of I would say, reconstruction or of the resilience, legitimacy, and hope in the region. Right. Absolutely.
Well, that's good. You sound very optimistic. Now, I'm curious what, Michael, you have to say about this. Are people talking about Canada in DC in this when it comes to this sort of ecosystem that we're talking about?
I'm afraid that as a nation, Americans suffer from an insufficient appreciation of the role of Canada in general. I think we deal with that all the time, and of course things are the bad relations now between the two governments isn't making that it isn't changing that for the better, because as you pointed out earlier, Donald Trump is really central to all of these projects. So it's not. I agreed, by the way, with everything that Ronen said about what Canada might do, but a bigger role for Canada almost requires, a better set of relations between the Trump administration and the Canadian government. Another area that where Canada might play a role is on the Iran question as well, because I think historically the Canadians have understood the threat from Iran better than a lot of other Western countries. Exactly what role Canada might play there at this point, I don't know, but it would be worth thinking about.
Michael, and I would like to get your thoughts on this as well, Ronen. But Michael, over the last, let's just say since October 7th, over 2 years, obviously the language and the rhetoric coming out of Ottawa has been different than Washington. That's pretty obvious. To what extent, you talked about Canada-U.S. relations, and there are obviously some serious challenges right now that are public. But have you picked up any vibes in DC in the community in terms of irritation in DC with Ottawa's approach to Israel? Because Canada's relationship with Israel right now is it is also experiencing some challenges, to put it mildly. Is that influencing the Trump administration and their dealings with Canada? Because from having Hamas thank basically acknowledge Canada's foreign policy numerous times, to the recognition of Palestinian statehood, to all these sorts of different things. Is that having an impact on all of this, Michael, or probably not? I mean, I'm curious what you
No,
think.
it does. It does to a degree. I don't want to overstate it, because in the MAGA world today, you have a split. There's a wing of MAGA that is, I would say, hostile to Israel, but maybe if that's an exaggeration, I would say, um, does not appreciate the centrality that Israel plays in Donald Trump's foreign policy. But I would say that if we're talking about somebody like Marco Rubio, I think that he's going to be, which is where it matters the most. I think he's going to be very aware of what Canada has been doing and saying. And you saw that you remember the statement by Marco Rubio about the French position and how unhelpful it was in bringing about the ceasefire, and so forth. Right now, the role of Israel in American foreign policy is being contested openly, publicly, and this is happening inside the Democratic Party and inside the Republican Party. But I think for Donald Trump, for Marco Rubio, for traditional centrists from the Democrats or the Republicans, Israel is central to American foreign policy. It's central to the order that the United States wants to build in the Middle East. And I think Americans in general tend to see, most Americans tend to see Israel as America's little sister, really as a family member. It's not, the relationship is special. And so when other countries have a different attitude, I think it gets noticed in Washington.
Yeah, yeah, well said. Ronen, what's your take on this, if you wouldn't mind weighing in?
No, of course. Look, I'm not in Washington, but I can assume that Trump's administration, as you mentioned and as Mike explained, they're so busy focusing on their own, orchestrating everything that happens in the Middle East. That, yes, obviously the relationship between the U.S. and Canada, there are challenges. But I don't see how the issue of the Middle East at the moment would be, in a central kind of position on the table among discussions in Washington at the moment. Maybe I'm wrong. But I think that we should really try to distinguish between the current moments, what we are experiencing now in the region, and what the future could bring. I know, again, I don't want to sound too naive and I am optimistic, but I believe that the situation in the Middle East at some point, and maybe not too far in the future, would be much more stable, there will be much more room for multilateralism. And then where I see it, that Washington would welcome Canada's role in the future multilateralism or diplomacy in the region, especially when they would start really focusing on who's going to invest, who's going to be part of the reconstruction, and who's going to really be proactive in trying to put things together. I think that they would welcome Canada's involvement in it.
Ronen, if you can speak to this a little bit. I know it's there's some sensitivities around all of this, but I think people listening would be really interested to hear sort of from you, in terms of when you were Israel's ambassador to Canada, what were some of the challenges at the time, just in terms of general communication and relations, and what were some of the things that were areas of strength and resilience between the two countries? And do you think those are still the same dynamics today between Jerusalem and Ottawa? And if not, what's your view from now being sort of on the outside in terms of what's changed?
Yeah, first of all, I think there are two different things: the current dynamic and the core of the relationship, right? So, I think and I still believe that Canada and Israel has so much in common. They share the same values. They share a lot of interests in the region. They're committed to the liberal democracy and all that. I think it's still there, and I think this is very, very central in the ongoing long-term relationship between Canada and Israel. At the same time, sometimes, and this is, and I'm not going to, I'm now, I know I've been ambassador, but as you said, it could be sensitive. So I'm now speaking as a scholar. Sometimes naturally between governments and between countries, there are tensions in certain point of times that wouldn't necessarily harm the core of the relationship and the partnership, the ongoing partnership between the countries. And that's what I hope would happen between Israel and Canada. Yes, now there is tension. I'm aware of the tension, and I'm not at all. I'm not going to get to the blame game. Who's more, who's this. But I'm saying that for the long term of the relationship, I think that there is a very, very substantial, positive, constructive core of friendship and sharing values and sharing interests between Israel and Canada. And I expect that the dynamic would change, and we'll see again we'll see some very, very positive aspects of this relationship. Now, let me say one thing about it, which is really, we are now entering the year of election in Israel, right?
Right.
So when you get political changes, I, for example, myself, I was a political appointee, and when the government has changed, I felt that my integrity requires me to step down, and I did. So I'm just saying that changes in governments, in the dynamic of political leaderships, also have some impact on the relationship at that specific, but not at the core of the relationship, which I believe is very, very strong.
Right. I want to save plenty of time here for audience questions. So maybe I'll ask you both this last question, and then we can move to some audience Q&A. We had many questions that were pre-submitted in advance of our call today. So obviously, a lot of what we're talking about, most of what we're talking about, is the road ahead, the future, what's in store. If we look a year out from today, and Michael, maybe we can start with you. Let's talk, because these are the two areas that, in my mind, are probably most central to the broader thinking in terms of the Middle East right now, and that is Gaza and Iran. What would a positive development look like in a year from now? If things went according to plan, what do these areas look like in a year, and what needs to happen to get there?
If we talk about Gaza, then I think we want to see Hamas disarmed, and and the Gaza Strip demilitarized. So anything that moves in that direction seriously is a positive step, and it's the key to anything else. Hamas is going to try to establish in Gaza the Hezbollah model, where and the Hezbollah model in Lebanon is that you have a kind of Potemkin Lebanese government. Potemkin is too strong, but you have the Lebanese government, which looks like it's a sovereign government, but is not really. And Hezbollah runs whatever it wants to run. It takes whatever it wants to take, and it leaves the rest to the Lebanese government. And then the Western countries, I think all of them, including my own governments, say we don't deal with Hezbollah, and they deal with the Lebanese government. But they're not being fully honest, because they understand, and many of the things that they're talking to the Lebanese government about, the Lebanese government is just playing the role of intermediary, and it's going and talking to Hezbollah. So we can say our hands are clean. We're not negotiating with Hezbollah, but in fact we are through the intermediary of the Lebanese government. Hamas is going to try to create that kind of system where you have this Palestinian technocratic government under the board of peace. But Hamas will remain the real power on the ground, dictating everything that is of importance to them, taxing anything that comes in or out of the Gaza Strip, and maintaining their position so that they can live to fight another day on down the line. I think our job is not to. There's going to be there are going to be forces in the world, external forces, but also inside the American government and possibly even inside the Israeli government, that are going to be in favor of that option. And they're going to say this is the least worst option. They don't have, the argument will be, they don't have the kind of weaponry or forces that can threaten another kind of October 7th attack. The cost of rooting them out of the Gaza Strip is too high. Let's just accept this as the least worst option and manage Gaza in that way. I think that's will be short-sighted. I don't think we have to accept that, but that's what we have to look out for. Is I think the wrong way to go. It will be presented, if it moves that way, it'll be presented by all who are engaged in it as advancement toward the disarmament of the demilitarization of Gaza, but we will actually be doing the opposite. So we want to see real disarmament of Hamas, real demilitarization. And the basic idea that they're working from is that there's going to be, we're gonna think of like an hourglass. There's going to be one part of Gaza that is totally free of Hamas, and we're going to start the rebuilding of the Gaza Strip there, and over time that area is going to expand, and while it expands, people who don't want to live under the thumb of Hamas are going to migrate into that area, and eventually the Hamas itself will be relegated to a small corner of the Gaza Strip. I like that picture. I would love to see it. I would love to see it unfold. So far, it's a vision and not actually a concrete reality. I don't want to say that it has no chance of happening. I think it does. That's one of the interesting things about the dynamism of President Trump and the way he's pushing everyone in that direction. But if I had to bet, I would bet a year from now, Gaza is going to look kind of like it looks today. But I'm not saying I'm not saying that is inevitable, and I certainly hope that it will not be that way. But I'm watching. With a little bit of skepticism, I'm watching and hoping for the best.
Ronen, how about you? I mean, a year from now, what does meaningful progress look like, and what's it going to take to get there?
Yeah, so I agree with everything that Mike says. I just would like to add some, maybe few elements to it. I think that it could be realistic enough to, within a year, to start something like a roadmap for the region, I'm not talking about something which is up in the sky. I'm talking about Trump's vision and Trump's strategy, maybe more detailed and a little bit, with a more planning forward, like let's say not a year or 2 years, but let's say 3 to 5 years from now. For that, first of all, I think it will motivate more stakeholders, positive, pragmatic, stakeholders to get in and to take some responsibility in the region and outside the region. But also I think that it will generate, I would say, could generate a positive dynamic within the Palestinian society to start, see who's going to be the next generation of the Palestinian leadership. Could we actually start in the next year to speak with some more pragmatic, Palestinian political, public figures who are not Hamas at all, and not necessarily the Palestinian Authority, but can we start speaking with some pragmatic, because everything that will happen in the region, or I'd say most of it, is dependent on geopolitical and global kind of things, not only on regional things, but the bilateral relationship between the Israelis and the Palestinians after Hamas would have to be dependent on a pragmatic Palestinian political leadership. And I hope that in the next year, we'll see some, at least starting point of a reasonable partner on the other side of the table that we can actually start negotiating with, or some kind of arrangement. I'm not talking about even two-state solution.
I mean, I couldn't have asked for a better segue, honest to God, because one of the questions that came in, and I'd like to turn to some of these questions now that were sent in advance, is a question that all three of us are probably asked all the time. I'm sure the three of us, I certainly do, think about this at least from time to time, and that is the two-state solution, which you ended with there, Ronen. I have mixed feelings about it, and I certainly have since October 7th, but I would really love to get your thoughts on whether or not a two-state solution is still really something that's on the table. Michael, what do you think about that?
I don't think it's realistic. I think the time has passed for the two-state solution. Look, the two sides are just too far apart. There's no I haven't seen anything since the second Intifada that leads me to believe that the differences between the Palestinian leadership and the Israelis of whatever political stripe can be bridged. If I look at it only from an American point of view, forget about the Israeli interests. I don't think it's an American interest, and I think more and more Americans are seeing it that way, because we can't. Abu Mazen doesn't have control over all of Ramallah, or if he's got control over all of Ramallah, his control doesn't extend beyond that. You can't assume that because you get an agreement between an Israeli prime minister and the Palestinian Authority that leads to any stabilization of the region. And what we don't want are, for example, Iranian, Quds Force operatives on the West Bank. We don't want that for Jordan, and we don't want it for Israel. I think it would be ultimately destabilizing to have a two-state solution, not stabilizing. But that's already after just the practicalities. It's not practical. There's no way. No one can come up with a formula that the two sides will accept. If that magically appeared, I might change my view. But I don't think we should. I think foreign policy has to be about what can be achievable in a relatively short period of time, and that is not realistic.
Yeah, Casey, if I may, I completely agree. And when I mentioned that we need to see on the other side of the table another counterpart to negotiate with, I did not mean two-state solution. Unfortunately, I agree, and I don't think it's realistic at all, and I don't think it's. I don't know if it's in American interest, but I don't think at the moment it's in Israeli interest to even raise this issue on the table, because obviously it's just unachievable. There's no, it's just not realistic. At the same time, I think that at the end of the day, we should find some kind of arrangement which will alter, which is instead of the two-state solution, traditional formula, which will allow us to stabilize our relationship for the long term with the Palestinians. And I don't know, it's we have to be not only creative, but we have to work in order to found that kind of. But in order to work on it, we need to at least have someone on the other side that would be willing to, first of all, recognize our right to exist, which is, and then recognize that we should find together a solution. And unfortunately, I don't see that. But you asked me earlier about 1 year from now. I'm saying that in 1 year from now, I hope that there will be someone we can start talking with about this kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, related to this, I mean, one of the questions that we received, which I'm sort of revising slightly, well, what will need to happen then in terms of Palestinian society and culture for there to be, forget the two-state solution. I'm talking about the emergence of more pragmatic Palestinian leaders, a leadership, a people who believe in Israel's right to exist, and so on and so forth. Michael, maybe we can start with you. What needs to happen? I mean, from my perspective, there have been, and it's been really disappointing, I'll be honest with you, since October 7th. There haven't been that many individuals of Palestinian descent or who identify as Palestinian who have emerged as sort of these voices who you can sit down with and actually have a conversation, a reasonable conversation with about the future. I mean, there's been a small handful of them, and I think we should be grateful to them and acknowledge them, but there hasn't been enough of that. Have you thought about this? What do you think needs to happen in Palestinian society for there to be more of a workable sort of environment?
I worked in the White House in the George W. Bush administration, and Bush was very much in favor of a two-state solution, and we spent a lot of time on this question and identifying pragmatic Palestinians that wanted to focus on building the Palestinian state rather than attacking Israel. And the fact of the matter is that position, let's call it the Salam Fayyad position.
Right.
Salam Fayyad was every American's favorite Palestinian leader. Sort of the technocratic Palestinian. That position exists. You can find lots of Palestinians particularly in business, but not only, who would like their leadership to focus on building the Palestinian state on all levels, and to basically disconnect from the Palestinian-Israeli conflict as much as possible. They exist, but they don't receive. They don't have a lot of credit in retail Palestinian politics. They don't have a lot of following. They don't get a lot of following, beyond Western powers as well. It's just a reality, and I think that the whole direction of American policy is to move away from trying to turn peoples into something that we would like them to be, rather than what they are. So, looking at this reality, I think it's up to us, the United States, to build the structures that will look after our security. And there are ferocious enemies of the United States that have purchase in the Middle East, led primarily by Iran, but behind Iran is China. And they're using these conflicts against the United States, and I don't think that rebuilding remaking the Middle East in our image is anything that we should spend our time on. If Palestinians, seeing the new framework, have ideas about how to contribute to that vision and want to be part of it, that's a whole different conversation. But I don't think we need to spend a lot of time thinking about it. It's a second, for me, that question is like, what are my feelings about Western Sahara? I don't think Americans need to spend a lot of time thinking about Western Sahara. It's wonderfully situated as part of Morocco now, and we don't need to think about it.
Right. Ronen, what are your thoughts on this?
I mean, I understand Mike's position, but I have to think about it as an Israeli. I live there, and we need to see what's going to happen in, not only on our borders, but there is some kind of political arrangement in the future that we have to start thinking of. I don't have it. I don't have the solution, but I do feel committed to try to find a reasonable partner on the other side to at least discuss it. Now, there has been many years, that debate whether we can resolve the conflict with the Palestinians through the region. I mean, getting regional players to help or to enforce it, or maybe we can get to the regional agreement through some kind of an agreement between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Now, look what President Trump, and we are all so grateful for that. I mean, the Abraham Accords are a great, the way I see it, great platform for getting a regional kind of arrangement. What I'm saying is that I don't see how around the table, in that round table of hopefully more and more stakeholders that will join the Abraham Accords, I don't see in the long term how the Palestinians are not part of this round table.
Mm.
And again, not because I like saying it, just because, we need to be able at some point to think who are the Palestinians after Hamas. Yeah, I'm not talking about at all at the moment, but looking forward, who is going to be there on the Palestinian side that could be a reasonable partner to speak with? It's an issue, and we need to face that issue because we live there and it's part of our life.
Can I add something here?
Please.
Just to make my position a little clearer. When I worked in the White House, 2005 to 7, I watched this question eat up more time of senior American leadership than almost any other question. That was during the Iraq War was going on.
Michael, just to be clear, what was, just so people understand, what was the question that was taking up so much time?
Building a two-state solution.
Right. Okay.
Right. Building a two-state solution and finding the Palestinians who will help us build a two-state solution, and finding the diplomatic formulae that will allow the Israelis and Palestinians to work together. And that's true for every administration. It has this unbelievable ability to suck up valuable time. There's nothing more valuable than the time of senior leadership. And this issue has not moved 1 inch since the year 2000. And yet it sucks up all of this attention, which is out of all proportion to its strategic importance. It has a political importance. It is at the ideological center, or it is at the center of a number of ideological conflicts that are going on simultaneously in our world. So it has this ability to attract more attention than any other question because of that. But what happens is a kind of unconscious conclusion that because it has all of this political, it attracts all this political attention, it must be strategically important. But it's not. It's not. It simply isn't. If we had an agreement tomorrow between Abu Mazen and Bibi Netanyahu about a two-state solution, the day after tomorrow, on everything that we've been talking about in this session here, Iran, Gaza, anything else in the Middle East, Syria, Iraq, would be exactly the same as it is today. Exactly the same. So I think it's time that we right-size our right-size our understanding of this conflict. I understand Ronen completely. As an Israeli, this is something that this goes right to the heart of the nature of Israel, going forward. So Israelis and Palestinians are going to be very much engaged in this question. I don't think it's something that Americans have to worry about as much as they have.
That's such an interesting point, because I mean, as a Canadian, whether it's in the classroom in universities, doesn't matter what university, of course, it's coast to coast, or in different workplaces, around the coffee table, wherever, in the library. Anyway, that's all people talk about. That's where their mind goes, just instinctually. It's what they've been taught that's the direction that you have to go. That's the only way. That's the only path to peace. So I must say I agree with much of what you've both said on this. Of course, and Ronen, that is certainly we appreciate that this is your backyard, right? And that the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians, of course, affects you directly in very different ways than it does me. To end, hopefully, maybe on a bit of an optimistic note, a forward-looking note. You mentioned the Abraham Accords, Ronen. Let me ask you this one final question, and then maybe we'll wrap, and you can get some time back on this Thursday. But what's the likelihood, Ronen, that we see an expansion of the Abraham Accords in the near term, and how significant will that be for Israel and regional implications?
Casey, I know the situation is complex, but I'll give you a simple answer. I hope it's simple. It's not simplistic. But as long as President Trump is willing to invest time, energy, and resources in his plan and in the strategy and the vision that his administration has for the region, and I'm regardless now for this answer, what are the interests? I'm not talking about, but as long as he's willing to invest, there is a good chance that more and more stakeholders, including significant, important stakeholders, will join the Abraham Accords. And here again, I'm as an Israeli, I'm saying, during the war and after the war, it is significant for us to see that there is an ally, a friend, the really president of the United States who is willing to invest so much, and there is a plan. There is a platform that we can actually work around it, and as long as that would be the efforts and the focus, I believe that most stakeholders would be motivated to join.
Michael, what are your thoughts on the future of the Abraham Accords?
I think that there's a kind of disconnect. I was trying to find the right word. Disconnect is too strong a word, but there's not as much continuity between the attitude that Donald Trump had in his first administration toward the Abraham Accords and the one he has now. There's a tendency in the administration to dissociate Israel from some of the bigger questions in the region. For example, the U.S.-Saudi negotiations over Saudi security cooperation with the United States, the U.S. negotiations with the Shara government in Syria and the Turks about the future of Syria. I think that Donald Trump clearly, as I mentioned before, has a vision of Israel as a central pillar of the new American order. But there's a little bit of a contradiction between that vision and the way he's going about the way he's carrying it out. Because I think that conditioning deeper cooperation between the Soviet Union, between the Saudi Arabia and the United States on movement toward normalization was a smart way to go. I think with regard to the Turks, I think that Donald Trump has the right idea of forcing cooperation between the Turks and the Israelis. So he had this idea. The Turks wanted to put forces in Gaza. The Israelis said no. Kushner and Witkoff have the Qataris and the Turks on the board of peace. I think the idea that we should have an accommodation between Israel and Turkey is good. Putting them in Gaza, putting the Turks and the Qataris in Gaza is not a good idea. That this is going to create tension between Turkey and Israel rather than accommodation. So in that area, I think the United States should be working to separate the Turks and the Israelis, to play a mediator between them, not to create new areas of friction. I think there's an insufficient appreciation in the Trump inner circle of how deep the discord is right now between the Turks and the
Right.
and the Israelis. So I'm kind of talking here in a sense saying opposite things, but what I'm trying to say is that I think that as the United States negotiates with all of its other major partners, it should be negotiating with an eye toward those partners working with the United States and Israel simultaneously. We shouldn't put Israel off to one side and negotiate with them without considerations about Israel, because Israel is central to our vision of the order. Am I being clear? Because I feel like my words are saying the opposite of what I'm trying to convey. You have to. There has to be an understanding of. There has to be an understanding of when to keep Israel and local partners apart. But even when doing that, so let's say with regard to the Turks, the message of Donald Trump to President Erdogan has to be, you cannot organize your foreign policy in the region in opposition to Israel.
Mm-hmm.
That is an opposition. That is a de facto opposition to the United States, right? I understand that you have conflicts with Israel, and I will be here to mediate, keep you apart, play a buffer, and so on. But you cannot organize against Israel. And the closer you get to Israel, the closer you get to us.
Right.
Do you see what I mean? It's a nuance.
Absolutely. If I'm hearing you, I mean, if I were to sort of boil this down a bit, it would be that continuity element that you mentioned is very interesting, and that naturally, I think the average person thinks that there's just aggressive work underway to and an appetite in the administration to have an expanded Abraham Accords 2.0, and that may not necessarily be the case. There might be more of a strategic path towards relationship building in the region with Israel and American interests at the core of that.
It has to be the message the United States is sending publicly and privately. I don't want to name them, but there are some countries that were on the verge of much closer relations with Israel,
mm-hmm.
but are now hanging back.
Mm-hmm.
And they're hanging back, and they're waiting to see. And they're receiving from some countries and the powerful countries in the region. They're getting a very a strong message not to get closer to Israel. And from Washington, they're getting a mixed message. Right? Our message, the American message, has to be very, 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 very clear. It isn't that you can't have good relations with us unless you have good relations with Israel, but it is the closer you get to Israel, the closer you'll get to us.
Very interesting. Very well said. Ronen, did you have any final thoughts on that before we wrap up?
I'll just say that I completely agree, and I think that if I understand correctly, at least the attitude and the approach of the American administration is that they actually go exactly to that direction. And I agree with Mike; it should be privately and publicly, and that would be the way to implement and to achieve the objectives that the Trump administration and Israel will benefit from it as well. Absolutely, in the region.
Well, I really appreciate and value both of you and your time. I hope that there were some people listening to this and who can access it, because it's going to be, it's recorded and it's going to be online. People can go back and watch it. I hope that there are some people in Canada who listen to this, and whether they're in academia or government or elsewhere, that they were able to get something from this, and hopefully it informs some of their thinking going forward. Because for me, this was very valuable, and I really appreciate it. You're both excellent. So thank you so much for your time, and I hope we get to do this again.
I'm sorry we agreed so much. I thought we would generate a little disagreement.
I know. Next time we'll get right into it.
And I even agree with that kind of statement.
Yeah, I know. There you go. Next time the gloves are coming off, we'll make it more adversarial. But no, thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.